Good morning everybody and welcome to the latest in the TeleWare webinar series. Today's webinar is called Reach for the Sky and we're going to be talking about the adoption of next generation cloud services for voice and e-communication compliance. So today I'm joined by a very handsome panel. First of all, I'll introduce myself first. I'm Mark Elwood and I'm the Marketing Director here at TeleWare. And the first panellist is Hannah Cawthorne from Microsoft. Hi Hannah.
Hey Mark, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Andrew Forster is the Product Manager from TeleWare and our resident MiFID expert.
Good morning everyone.
And finally, Ian Salmon from Ignite has joined us.
Good morning.
Hi everybody and welcome. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into the first of our questions. So cloud technology has changed significantly over the last few years in particular. So Hannah, could you go into a little bit of detail about some of those changes and how they're impacting some of your customers?
Yeah, sure. So I've been at Microsoft on their cloud journey for the last 5 years, and I guess when I think of this question as well, if I reflect back 3 years ago, working in the space, working in the financial services industry as well, there was a lot of questions where, or a lot of conversations we were having talking about, look, cloud is inevitable, but it's more of a matter of when is that going to happen and when is that going to impact the industry. Certainly the conversations that I'm having, my colleagues are having with our customers in this space now is they're asking us, like, the timing's now, and actually how can we help people get there in a safe and compliant manner. I certainly, if we look at the adoption of cloud across financial services, we now have 7 of the top 8 too big to fail insurers on our cloud. And we also have 20 out of the top 26 too big to fail banks. And when we say that they're on our cloud, we're now seeing this as an adoption of significant workloads, as opposed to just testing a couple of things, like maybe a bit of storage up in the cloud or something like this. This is significant workloads that our customers are actually putting into the cloud.
Excellent. So Andrew, from a TeleWare perspective, in terms of the cloud usage and adoption, how are we kind of integrating things from within TeleWare?
So I think you're seeing that as cloud technologies become, if you like, the default and the new normal, I think you're seeing a realisation that you can't really assess a single vendor solution. Many of the sort of key developments require multiple vendors and linking systems together with things like APIs. So I think there's a realisation that there's sort of no one size fits all, particularly in the compliance space as the requirements have become more complex.
Thanks, Andrew. So from a compliance perspective, Hannah, are there any kind of key things that are driving increased cloud usage?
Yeah, well, I think that compliance is certainly one element of it. We're obviously working in a very highly regulated industry. The very nature of the call we're having today proves that outright. So compliance is absolutely fundamental. So if I look at the work that we've been doing around this space over the last number of years, is like Microsoft believes that we have the most compliant compliant platform in the industry. We do an awful lot of work to make sure that we are doing that work for our customers and making sure that we have compliant, highly regulated, where we meet the regulators' needs. Other aspects, though, that I think are really important, the other key aspects of why people are now happy to start moving onto cloud platforms, or are looking at the detail behind how we move to cloud platforms, is around things like the transparency around where data is stored. That transparency around data is absolutely critical. Security is we actually have, as you can imagine, a hugely secure platform. We put a lot of R&D around the security side of things. But also privacy protection is really important. We take that very seriously, and we have some really public examples of how we take that seriously, down to an individual user on a Hotmail account all the way through to large corporates. And then also making sure that actually it's really important, this isn't our data, it's our customers' data, it's our customers' applications, our customers' environments. So how do we make sure that there's really great customer controls so people can run the environment as their own, because that's what it is.
Yeah, and that environmental landscape has changed enormously this year with the introduction of MiFID II. So, Andrew, how has MiFID II kind of impacted your customers?
Well, MiFID II sort of almost been the perfect storm, because you've had at least a tenfold increase in the period of which you're going to have to store communications recording data. And then you've got multiple means of recording data. So typical business conversations, business communications will move from mobile to fixed line to instant messaging and Skype and even video coming in now, which are very rich data sources. So you've got this sort of explosion in the amount of data which is required. And the cloud has a natural sort of fit with these sort of ultra large scale data storage, data processing requirements that increasingly are global as well.
That all sounds really expensive. So if customers are having to record much more information, how are they able to kind of manage those costs effectively, or is that having a significant impact on their overall cost base?
I think certainly from a cloud point of view, looking at cost income ratios is certainly an agenda item on many business plans around moving to the cloud. There is it's interesting actually if you kind of look at how we set it up, is there's things in that area, just to take a very simple example, where because of the size and scale of the Azure cloud platform that Microsoft does, is the sheer amount of electricity that we buy makes it that we actually have cheaper. We buy electricity cheaper than any of our financial services customers.
Okay.
But then if you actually think about the fact that, this is what we do, this is our business, you can very easily provision services from us in a matter of minutes. And so if you actually think about a business objective that you're trying to achieve, is quite often in the past, or quite often today as well, is it's like actually how do we provision some hardware, how do we actually get that on site? That can take time, there's policies, there's procedures, and the time to actually do business can be a very long cycle to complete. But also you've then made that investment. So the other thing that we are really focused on is saying actually you can very quickly spin something up, which could be a solution exactly like TeleWare has. It's a very quick thing to spin up. You can test it, and actually when we look at these different solutions, there's some of them there's a fail fast mentality in the cloud as well, because then you can turn it off as easily as you can turn it on.
Yeah.
And so that could be trying some experiments out, but it could also be by just surely using compute power in the cloud, is you just use it and you pay for it as you go. So it's quite a pay as you go model if you think about it, whereas once you're investing on this in your own environments, then that investment is a sunk investment that needs to be managed 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ian, to bring you in here, I know that you've been working very closely with a number of organisations and capital markets firms who are affected by MiFID II. What are some of the drivers that you're experiencing that those people are telling you around their journey to the cloud?
I think that the generic business drivers of, you talked about costs and cost comparisons. For sure, among our our conversations and our clients, we've seen almost like a blanket attitude to adoption of the cloud now, which has changed significantly, I have to say, probably over the last 12 to 18 months. So there's been a turnaround. Maybe it's a comfort factor around security, perhaps it's internal knowledge base that's improved, but generally the likelihood of take up and the appetite for take up has increased, and a lot of that's been driven, of course, to answer your question, by the fact that people are looking to manage the massive uptick in storage and application level activity because of compliance, but without adding significant cost. And they're having to throw a lot of people at this problem, as well as infrastructure, and as well as development on their application level platforms as well. and taking out one significant cost, which is, or managing one significant cost, which is, the massive increase in storage for one, but also in compute power that's required to underpin all those platforms is another.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, I was just going to come to you next. So, I know that within MiFID II in particular, there's a requirement to record more mobile communications. So, what is it that TeleWare are actually doing to kind of leverage emerging technologies in this area?
Well, telephony is a piece where the cloud really has played in very strongly. So, we're increasingly seeing clients come to us with global requirements for communications recording, and the ability, for instance, to put effectively session border controllers, which are effectively IP-based telephone switches, in the cloud, and be able to, as Hannah said earlier, sort of spin those up and down almost at will for specific geographies. It has really sort of revolutionised the sort of cost of establishing global services in particular, and what's been refreshing as well is our clients increasingly looking at not just, if you like, the systems cost, not just the people's cost of putting compliance in place, but a term we use a lot, which is the total cost of compliance. So you've got to look at it holistically in terms of the people costs, using things like robotic process automation to take out manual tasks, predictive analytics to be able to see where where potential compliance black spots are emerging. All of these play very, very well into the cloud piece, both for us as a service provider and for our customers.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And there's some really thought-provoking answers there, everybody. And to the audience, if anybody has got any questions coming out of any of these answers, then do use the questions section within BrightTalk to actually fire any questions across, and we should have some time at the end to answer any of those questions. So I'm going to move things on just around some of the drivers that are creating change within organisations. So we know that compliance is a major driver of technology overhauls at present, but how are cloud services adapting to be compliant? Hannah, can I go to you first of all to answer that one?
Yeah, so I think, I guess some of this around the compliance area specifically this is a little bit of an extension to Andrew's comments as well around some very specific compliance needs around MiFID II and solutions around the telephony space. I think when we look at the partnerships that Microsoft have and the TeleWare partnership being a really key one as well, is what we aim to do as an organisation from a compliance level for both our partners and our customers is provide that very compliant base. I referenced to it earlier, but if we dig into that a little bit, is when we talk about compliance, there's a lot of different areas in here that we can look at, and I certainly encourage people to do the due diligence and homework around that as they look at sorts of platforms that they're looking to use. But I'm going to pick out a few examples just to demonstrate what I mean by that topic of compliance. So one is we adhere to a lot of global standards, and we look at it in three ways. So first of all, we look at it from a technical level across industries. So an example there is ISO compliancy. So we actually have a compliant platform against ISO 27018, which was actually a born in the cloud compliancy around what we do around managing data and how we control data, or how customers manage and control their own data. But then actually we also look at things, so that's kind of a horizontal cross-industry view we look at, but we also look at things from a very vertical industry angle as well. And an example of this, I'm going to take it out of financial services for a moment just to give a good example to bring it to life, but in the vertical side is we're actually compliant to DISA level 2. Now that might not mean much for a number of European customers on the phone, but from a US point of view, that's a requirement against compliancy to the US Department of Defense. So we actually have the US Department of Defense using our platform, and we're compliant against it, so you can imagine sort of the data that's going in and out of that. But then we also look at it from a global level as well, or sort of specific country level. So another example of that is we're compliant against the European Union model clauses. Now, because there's a lot of specificity, I can't say that word, but specifics to the financial services industry, is what we have actually done is we spent an awful lot of work and worked very closely with a number of Pacific banks as well around creating a financial services compliant amendment. So looking at what it is that our customers require from the regulators and making sure that we can help achieve things like how do you audit us, for example, is a really common one. So we know that that's really important for partners and customers to be able to achieve those things in a highly regulated environment. So we've actually created programs and specific terms and conditions that enable our customers to adhere to that. I'll use an example actually of one of our customers. It's a very large customer of ours, but UBS. They're doing a huge amount of work on our cloud platform. But they actually, they sort of said, look, they're building on our cloud platform, and actually the innovation, technology, security, and regulatory compliance is critical, and it's so important because they're a Swiss financial institution, and the Swiss are very highly regulated as well. So
Okay.
just a little bit of detail around what we do on a compliant platform to provide a platform for everybody to then be able to build and work and drive value off the back of it.
Okay, wonderful. And Andrew, I'm going to bring you in here because I know from a TeleWare perspective there's an awful lot that's been happening there. So can I just...
Specifically for us working on cloud platforms such as Azure, great step forward for us has been the ability to sort of pin specific workloads, specific instances of both compute and storage to physical geographies. So this has helped us very much in sort of addressing local compliance requirements, such as in Germany, where all cloud communications recordings need to be stored locally. So the ability to sort of pin Azure instances to cloud data centers in Germany has basically enabled us to deliver those services in a fully compliant manner, while still providing the sort of open systems approach, which allows them to be the communications to be monitored from a central location as far as the institutions are concerned.
Thanks, Andrew. And Ian, I know that all this technology is throwing up a number of issues in the market themselves. So what's happening from a governance and related services perspective?
Yeah, I think, and what's really interesting listening to both of your answers there is there are specifics within each of your services that are answered by, or that apply to what's going on in the compliance space. If you take a step back from that, the big challenge for people is that they've now got to not only deal with massive influx or increase in data, but also the industrial robustness of what they're actually running in the cap market space is actually the reason that a lot of these regulations are actually being written. If you look at just the RTS6 requirements on algo traders, for example, you have to have robust systems, you have to show that you've got testing facilities in place, you have to have everybody trained on how to use the platform, you have to have a kill switch in order to stop the flows. Now if you take that, why am I mentioning that? If you take a step back from that, what that implies is that all the systems and all the platforms and all the governance around it that you run have to be very, very robust and very, very industrial. Now, how does the cloud help that? Well, of course, there are a number of ways the cloud helps that, and we're seeing this driving the adoption. One is the fact that you've got compute power and storage and massive capacity on demand, which is great, but also you've got an ecosystem of other services that relate to what you might be requiring as you go forward. And for a lot of smaller firms, they've now got as much richness of those services to pull on and use as some of the big guys. And so actually it allows them to be competitive on almost a pay-as-you-go or a scalable basis, but they can pull in things like timestamping the services.
Yeah.
They don't have to do this on premise. They don't have to worry about how they do it. More than that, they don't have to have somebody on hand and increase their cost base from a governance and a people point of view in order to be compliant, because those things are things they can dip into and take advantage of within an ecosystem which exists within the cloud.
Thanks, Ian. I'd just like to go back to something you touched on there, Hannah, when you gave the example of UBS, obviously a huge organisation who are doing lots of stuff using cloud technology. But is this something that only applies to the enterprise audience, or is it something that the smaller organisations can get involved in too?
Both. It spans across the board, and it can be for different reasons and the same reason. But I actually think if you take a small company, cloud is one of those technologies that really enables people to do more without having the skills in-house or spending a lot of money on becoming the experts in something that isn't the core business or where the business was set up in the first place. I mean, this is our bread and butter. This is what we put billions and billions of dollars into R&D on, what makes the best platform to run things on, what makes the most compliant platform. I was doing some work recently, actually, with one of the retail banks looking at digital skills out in the environment. And it's really interesting because we're actually bringing people like sole traders, but through to sort of small businesses in to talk about things like cybersecurity. So, it's absolutely critical. We've all seen so many examples in the news about how cybersecurity can take out both large and small companies. And that people are always going to do that, right? So actually is, to be a cybersecurity expert in a smaller company, that's not really what you want to be doing. So actually by understanding what the cloud can provide and making sure that, we take security very, very seriously, and you can come and talk to us at any time to understand sort of what we do in that area. But we have, we were actually the most attacked company in the world, and 10 years ago we had to really look at that, or probably 12 or 15 years ago now, we had to really look at that to stop those attacks. And so we have built some of the most secure platforms, and we've learned on that in the last 15 years. And that, I think, is where it really comes into its own. I mean, that's just one example, but if you're a small business, then, take the power and knowledge of everything that we've done to make the most secure platform possible, take the knowledge and skills around what TeleWare has done as being real experts in the telephony space and the MiFID II, Ian's skills around the regulation and what that means is, I think that's the beauty of something like a cloud platform, but also the platform that enables around a really huge ecosystem on helping smaller companies partner and learn and get the best skills that they possibly can, which in an old world might have been quite a hard thing to do. So very, very applicable, I think, for any size company.
Yeah, and the same goes for TeleWare, doesn't it, Andrew? So if you've just got a couple of users who you need to record.
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, we've taken a sort of a pure cloud by compliance as a service, or compliance recording as a service model. Again, prior to sort of cloud environments, cloud platforms such as Azure, that wouldn't have been possible because the fixed costs were very significant in terms of the whole piece. So as people start to look at the total cost of compliance, again, we're trying to put together services which basically give that predictability, so you know exactly what your costs are going to be, how they're going to flex over time, and the agility as well to flex them up and down and into new areas of the business.
So a lot of companies, as you've already touched on this, Andrew, a lot of companies are actually looking at the total cost of ownership, or the new terminology you're using is the total cost of compliance. How does a cloud-based model help in terms of the total cost of ownership?
Well, you've got a number of sort of explicit costs, which are, I guess, the sort of obvious things like the infrastructure and data center costs, storage costs, all of which, as we mentioned earlier, are getting much more significant on a rolling basis. You've also got to look now very much more strategically at this. With MiFID, you're looking at a minimum requirement of 5 years and potentially up to 7 years storage. So in that period of time, you're going to be looking at probably 2 or maybe 3 generations of technology coming in. So the fact that cloud services can be evergreen, that they can evolve over time without major sort of upgrades and major sort of rip and replace operations, again, that sort of has played in really well. The important thing is obviously that the data is stored in as neutral a form as possible, so that as new techniques and new tools for analytics come through, then you can really go and exploit those from day one, assuming that you've got your data stored in a reasonably neutral, vendor-independent format.
Thanks, Andrew. Hannah, not to put you on the spot, but is there anything from a Microsoft perspective that's kind of looking at that overall total cost of ownership and how a cloud-based model can help in terms of managing that total cost of ownership?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to just, for a little bit of consistency as well, I'm going to go back to the UBS example and just go into a few specifics around what they've done around that, which really demonstrates the total cost of ownership in a few ways. First of all, I think this is one of the first examples that they talk about, and this is a public reference as well, so we can share the details afterwards, but one of the things that they did is they looked at how they use the cloud to work on their risk management platform. So if you think about that risk management platform, there's a huge amount of data that there's a huge amount of information in there that needs to be crunched. So they actually use the cloud to do, the cloud compute power to do that. And it's interesting, actually, you look at many organisations now that are using compute power to do that kind of stuff, is they only need to do that in the week in many instances in the cap market space, so you can actually turn it off at the weekend. So if you're paying for stuff like that by the minute, then that actually gets down to potential huge cost savings. But if you actually flip that on the head as well, is some of the capabilities that are now available in the cloud is where we are in the market is data's king, right? Data is that's what will differentiate you as from your competitors if you can get a handle and a hold on that data. Yeah. So actually we have a huge amount of data capabilities around sort of the analytics, machine learning, predictive analytics and so forth. But actually to really enable some of these technologies, you need to be able to spin up huge amounts of compute power to do that as well. So it's kind of one and the same thing. It's like you save money by being able to spin up and spin down compute power, but actually by having that compute power there as well, is you can start to do new things that you just wouldn't have been able to afford to do before because you don't have the compute power available. And then just taking it off on a slightly different tangent as well, is another example that UBS have used, another example from UBS around using the cloud is that they did a lot of work around how they can use grow revenue using their partner sales, their partners. So actually, if you think about all of us, we all have ecosystems, we all have partners that we want to utilise. But if you want to get a new product out into your partner network quickly, for example, then how do you have a platform that can very quickly get those things out there? Things you want to, like product managers, marketers, salespeople, they want to get these things out very quickly, but there's normally a lag in how quickly we can actually, or how quickly an organisation can respond to that. But for various very good reasons, but actually by thinking about how you have an environment where you can quickly push things out is that's certainly something that they were looking at on white labelling solutions out to their partner network and getting that out to market very quickly.
Okay, so you're starting to touch on my next question actually. Before we go into that, Andrew, could I just go back to you for a second, just to kind of help us articulate how TeleWare and Microsoft are working together through a joint proposition to actually bring these cloud technology services into the capital market and wider financial services space?
Yeah, so as you can see on the diagram there, if you look at cloud communications recording for compliance markets, that's gone away from a situation probably 10 years ago where you were looking at just fixed line voice recording. Now includes things like mobile, Skype, instant messaging, email, and increasingly sort of social media has been core communications that have been used in the financial services community. The MiFID regulation says essentially all of this in terms of any relevant conversation now has to be recorded. So there have been point solutions for these individual modalities, for these individual media in the market for some time. What we've been working on with the Azure-based platform has been basically a unified repository for this, for cloud communications recording and storage, and also focusing on the right-hand side of the slide, what you can do with that data once you've got it all stored in a single accessible vault. So things like speech to text, obviously absolutely key there. Some of the tools which Azure has natively in its cloud for things like speech to text and analytics just really have enabled us to sort of imagine new types of services which wouldn't have been possible without the underlying cloud platform.
Thanks, Andrew. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you for some very short, pithy answers to the next question. So, Hannah, you started to touch on this earlier, but in terms of if you're planning for cloud migration, it's not always a simple process. There are some considerations in terms of existing contracts that you might have, large existing platforms, a whole range of things. So if you're starting on that cloud journey, what are a couple of key things that you should think when you're actually starting to plan that activity out?
Yeah, so I guess as my very first starting point is you don't necessarily need to do it by yourself. There's lots of people out there to help you. There's a few of us sat in the room, but there's a huge amount of people out there to help. But I guess making that a little bit more real, though, it's quite an easy, glib answer, right? But if you, I think quite a few people will quite often start with where there's a real business challenge or a business opportunity. And I think actually if you look at the solution that TeleWare has around the MiFID II area, that is it's a real thing that people are really trying to achieve. So quite often this will grow up in a place where you actually have some great business value that's coming out the back of it. That if people haven't had any adoption of cloud at the moment, then that sort of starts kicking off some of the processes as well to think about what are these things that, for example, that we talked to earlier around the compliance to regulatory is like, let's make sure that we can take people through that and understand that that's correct and in check for their organisation. But there's also other areas, I think, where you need to sort of look at what sort of the governance and operating models can look like in that area. So I think, from a starting point, I would say quite often starting from a solution is a really good starting point, which will then uncover some of these areas. But there's certainly a lot of help that can be provided from Microsoft partner networks as well around what a move to the cloud looks like, because it does affect.
I think that's a really important message, that you don't have to do this alone. And Andrew, from TeleWare's perspective, how do we help customers at TeleWare who are on this cloud journey or starting this cloud journey?
Yeah, well, I don't think from sort of our experience, many organisations obviously already have legacy environments in place for elements of their compliance. And you're not going to see people simply sort of dump off those and move instantly to the cloud. So it's more of a journey rather than sort of flicking the switch sort of piece. And you've got to consider as well the level of investment, both financial investment and investment in skills and everything that people have in the legacy platforms. So the approach we've taken at TeleWare has been largely sort of an incremental one. I think a great example of that is mobile voice recording, where we were sort of pioneers in putting that up into the cloud as a result of the 2011 FCA regulations. And what we've done there is basically make our mobile recording we've architected in such a way that it integrates very neatly with some of the existing fixed line archives, so the things like the Bloomberg, the NICE environments. It runs very comfortably alongside those. It can feed data into those. So it isn't a case of sort of rip and replace, it's a case of a journey and a progressive move to cloud-based services.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry, just one thing that prompted very quickly, but actually, I've talked a lot today about cloud, being up in the cloud, but actually we also are very focused around, as Andrew talking made me want to just highlight this point about the fact that we actually provide a hybrid solution. So when we say hybrid, we mean that we know that this is a journey, so there's optionality around on-premise today, moving to the cloud, actually how you knit those two things together. So that's a huge focus around our strategy, around how we can make that journey as seamless as possible.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you both. I was going to ask a question about Brexit. In the interest of time, I'm actually going to skip over that today, unless anybody has, from the audience, got any questions specifically on Brexit. But I did want to come into the audience questions. We've had a few that have come through. And I'm going to start by asking this question to you, Andrew. So how does the predictive analytics side of things help with MiFID compliance?
Yeah, so I did mention predictive analytics earlier and probably didn't sort of explain a little bit about the context of that in terms of compliance, which I think is the question there. Obviously, in terms of identifying potential areas for investigation, some of the predictive analytics tools are now able to look at large data sets around call patterns, to look at very, very sort of individual point patterns in calls and behaviour over time, to predict in advance where potential compliance black spots or black holes can be. Now, given that the sort of manual process is there's only so many people that you can throw at the compliance piece internally, to have a new set of tools which actually act as a bit of a searchlight to identify areas in which you should be paying attention, those are absolutely invaluable to make sure that your people cost, which is a very significant piece in the compliance world, in the compliance departments, to help them sort of focus on the areas which are likely to uncover the areas which are of specific risk and concern.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Right, now the next question I'm going to ask in two parts. The first part is over to you, Ian. This person's asked about a client that's based in Japan. Are they out of reach of MiFID II?
Oh, right, okay. It's probably there's probably a point of, or several points, other questions to ask before I can answer that in a single answer. But there are elements of business that you do with clients from outside the EU that come into MiFID regulation. So it depends.
So if they're trading with somebody,
if you're trading European instruments for overseas clients, or you could have overseas clients that imply a compliance requirement on you from their regulations into you in the EU. But actually, it raises a good point, which is one that I can expand on from something Andrew said earlier, which is actually having the ability to replicate environments and replicate capabilities you have within one single region out to become effectively global is so much easier when you're running stuff in the cloud, because obviously you can spin up an environment for a Japanese office, for example, using the same technologies that you're using in Europe. Now, previously you might have had to have actually done some on-premise work in a regional office, for example, which would have been very expensive and very high risk.
Okay, and then the other part of that question is how the cloud-based technology helps with the telephony services side of things. So Andrew, from a TeleWare and a recording perspective, all of that sits in the cloud, it uses cloud technology, all those recordings are stored and are made available via cloud technology.
Yeah, absolutely. You can essentially look at, for the first time, putting together a global solution which meets multiple compliance requirements across multiple geographies, and yet maintain that single sort of pane of glass view from a compliance standpoint to be able to do investigations and reconstructions and the like.
Thank you very much. Right, that's all the time we've got questions for today. I'd like to thank everybody on the panel for your time today. We've had some fantastic discussion and I really appreciate all of your contributions. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days. Hopefully you found the information that we shared with you really useful. If you have got any more questions, do get in touch. And if you've got any feedback for us, then use the feedback buttons on the BrightTalk channel. And then just one final thing just before we wrap up. If you're interested in any of the mobile recording technology that we've touched on today, do get in touch, do press on the feedback buttons and register an interest, because we're offering a free trial on a mobile device. You can keep it for a month and actually use either the SIM-based recording or the Recall app that we've just launched earlier this month, and you can get a feel for it and then tell us what you think, and hopefully you'll find that really useful. So thanks everyone, thanks for your time, and look forward to speaking to you again next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.